Hello, this is Carl Seidel on People's View, and today we have ch
House Speaker.
former House Speaker. How
Yeah,
about that?
how quickly they forget, you know?
No, I don't
Good to
forget,
see you,
but I have
Carl.
a. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, you know, coming off a really busy season
Right.
for elections and all. Last spring, I took a position, was asked to take a position I thought was going to be kind of part-time of
Uh-huh.
Election Integrity Council for
Yeah.
New Hampshire, retained by the Republican National Committee, and I was assured, oh, it's going to be 5-10 hours a week at most, and I think for 1 week it was 5 hours, and then it became, by the time well, the general election came around, even the primary, it became more like 50 hours a week. But it was good. It was a good experience.
Well, it
Very
was
good.
something that's necessary too, wasn't it? I mean, really, we worry about how our elections are held here, and there's always some, happens that little things, but we worry that it gets big, and I think
Yeah, I was, I've been involved in elections on
yeah.
the statewide level for 20 years now, in the legislature and so forth. So I've always had a sense that they are relatively fair. There's mistakes that are made. It's run by volunteers
Hmm.
substantially when you get down to the level of polling stations, for the most part. Elected officials like moderators and all who get trained up, but mistakes are made. But I was impressed. I think in New Hampshire we have an election system that we can cite with pride for the rest of the nation. Now, because I was involved in this, I was traveling around the country and going
Hmm.
to conferences and everything. I heard some real horror shows out there. As a country, we ought to be very concerned
Hmm.
about some of the intentional and unintentional practices that lead to some real concerns about elections. But in New Hampshire, when I tell people at conferences, everything, that what we have paper ballots, which
Hmm.
means there's always a record of what happened.
Hmm.
You can go back and look at what happened if you have to do a recount. There's paper ballots. That in fact, we have a recount system that is set up and very, very open
Hmm.
and works very well. They're impressed. They're really
Hmm.
impressed.
Well, we did have some problems where people misplaced ballots, and they caught them later on.
I
Correct?
can say this, given the fact that I've, passed over a certain age level that I won't disclose, but it gets me into an area where I can perhaps talk about people who are a more advanced age. And what you find is a lot of these elections are run by people who are in their 70s, sometimes their 80s, and they'll show up at 7 o'clock, 6:30 in the morning, and it's not unusual for them to be there past midnight. And some mistakes are made. Now,
Sure.
as part of what I did this cycle, I was involved in not only assisting the party in terms of how it put together its election day operations and attracting volunteer lawyers to be at sites and so forth. And we can talk about that. But I was also involved in the post-election process of,
Hmm.
recounts and challenges in front of the Ballot Law Commission and so forth. And I have to tell you, the type of mistakes that came up were usually mistakes of, weren't particularly intentional. They were just, somebody's tired.
Hmm.
We had one moderator, for example, who was there opening up absentee ballots, it appears, and someone came to him and said, there's a older woman here, perhaps a woman with Alzheimer's, and this particular moderator is himself in his 70s or 80s, and he's been working with Alzheimer patients, so they want him to come, stop what he's doing, go help this lady, which he did, and it appears he forgot that he hadn't opened 20 or 30 envelopes, and he just put them aside. And during the recount, all of a sudden, we were coming up with, I think it was actually 27 unopened absentee ballot envelopes.
Oh.
That sort of thing happens, and it's not right. There's 27 voters who ultimately had their votes counted because a recount was asked for, but that can happen. But what I didn't find is evidence of systematic fraud. Not that it doesn't exist, but there wasn't evidence of it. Where we have to work on New Hampshire elections, Carl, is in two areas. We have to better define what it means to be a New Hampshire voter,
Right.
what it means to be a resident of the state. I think that gets a lot of us uncomfortable. Certainly, our friends on the other side of the aisle, as we used to say when you and I in the legislature together, they might enjoy the process of having younger people come out of the colleges and vote Democrat, because younger people often do that. They might think it's good, but it's not good overall for people to be left with the sense that, gee, we're not really governing ourselves fully because,
Right.
residents of other states can come in here and vote. So we have to work on that. And I think one other area we have to work on is absentee ballots,
Oh, yeah.
in the verification of it. It used to be absentee ballots were relatively rare. Someone's disabled, someone's sick, someone's been called out of state, and it was just relatively rare. It's getting to be around 6 or 7% of all votes cast in New Hampshire are cast by means of an absentee ballot. And so it becomes more of an issue of how do you verify that this is the person? If you're in a small town and 3 people are voting by absentee ballot, Carl and Bill did that day,
Yeah.
and you recognize the handwriting is something. Now we get a lot of them. And there was a federal court case about 2 years ago where the New Hampshire federal court located in New Hampshire ruled that you can't use comparing signatures, signature verification, because they say people aren't trained into it, and it leads to potentially a lot of votes being rejected that should be rejected and aren't correctly rejected. But if you're not going to have that, then how do you make sure
Yeah.
that what you're getting is a ballot that was actually signed and voted by the person who
yeah.
ostensibly you're getting it from? I think a perfect thing to do, and they do it in other states, is to have a notarization requirement. If often people are in nursing homes, so you have a notary go over for a morning
Right.
to the nursing homes, and they use their absentee ballots, and you can probably avoid what some people get really concerned about, which is perhaps healthcare attendants are sitting there kind of crossing over a line of assisting to
Well, they had,
choosing.
there were a couple states that had that exact problem.
In Wisconsin,
Right.
earlier this year, from the 2020 election, there was a nursing home attendant who was actually sent to jail
Oh, yeah.
for filling out the ballot for some woman who was just totally disabled. She was not able to read anymore or appreciate anything close to being what she was doing would be voting. And so, and her family brought it up, saying, God bless Mom, but she's not voting these days because she doesn't even know what that is, but submitted a ballot. So,
Yeah.
that happens. But one of the things I want to really get across to people as I was going across the state and talking to Republican groups, because our party, I think, justifiably has some concerns about election integrity, is that it's not flawless, but it's fair, and your vote will count. It really
Right.
counts.
Right.
I'm going on and on, but let me tell you how much it will count. We had one race that was decided by one vote. We had a race over in Rochester that tied.
Yeah.
That tied. It's going to, I think, be sent back to the voters. That's how important votes are. I participated in probably, or either directly or indirectly, in 27 legislative recounts this cycle. We just completed it a couple of weeks ago. And those were races where, often out of a couple thousand votes, it was 8 votes, 10 votes that decided the race. So people ought to know when they walk in there that what they're doing is just not, kind of an empty gesture, but often can be determinative.
Well, I know that. I've had experiences in that. In fact, one person in my ward was elected way back in 2000. Let's see, it was 2008, and he was elected by 3 votes. And now, we had to go through a recount, obviously, but now he's gotten interested, and he's a senator.
Okay. All right. Well, that happens. That
Yeah.
happens. An area I do get concerned, and it's not really kind of a ballot or election law process itself, is you can't really call it fraud, although perhaps it's not right, perhaps it's even illegal, is you'll have, and it must be said, Democrat Party sources will send money to Republican candidates who they think will
Oh,
be the
yeah.
weakest in a general election. I mean, you have the cynicism of the Democrats on the national level talking about insurrectionists
Right.
and election deniers. I mean, we can put aside all the citations to Stacey Abbott and you know the
Yes,
person they
that's
just
right.
elected as their minority leader in the House of Representatives in Congress is an election denier. He spent 4 years denying President Trump's election. But put all that aside. They were saying that these people are insurrectionists. They said someone like Don Bolduc
Right.
or was an insurrectionist
The
because he was
general.
an
Yeah.
election denier, and they spent rather $5 million to get him to win the primary. And it would happen throughout the country. There was, they believe, between 50 and 60 million dollars spent by Democrat sources to get what they thought would be the weakest Republican elected. You know, and that is certainly wrong. It's
Right.
certainly fraudulent. I ended up filing a complaint against a brokerage house, a mailing house rather, in Fall River that mailed out numerous mailers into New Hampshire touting Republican candidates who they thought would be the weakest. It was a company called DeWalt, you know, printing or something like that. It's not a little company for a printing company. It has about 75, 80 employees or so. And it mailed a bunch of mailers into the second CD race, I believe the Senate race. And when they were asked, you know what happened? First of all, they said, we won't tell you who we're working
Right.
for. And then secondly, a guy named Mark Elias, who was the general counsel for the Hillary Clinton campaign, all of a sudden appeared out of nowhere, or maybe the back room, and said, "Oh, I represent this company. We're not going to tell you who we're working for." You know, there's something, you know, you can chuckle. I mean, if you're on the right side of that equation, you can chuckle and say, "Well, you're complaining about how effective we are." Yeah, we're also complaining that you violated the process.
Right.
You know, it would no more be right for Republicans to jump into a Democrat primary and try through fraud and anonymous donations to affect the result than it is the opposite to occur.
Well, that whole question about donation to some of these PACs, I guess you call them, is being looked at for legality again, isn't
Oh,
it?
it is. I mean, again, I did file, I said an FEC, it's Federal Election Commission complaint, and we'll see what they did. I mean, the back in 2015, I think it was, I filed the complaint against Bernie Sanders
Oh,
in the Federal Elections Commission, just not on behalf of anyone. I was just outraged because he was using Australian citizens sent and paid for by the Australian Labor Party, which is identified. If you look at the website, I think to this day, it says, we're a Marxist party. They sent him to, you know, appropriately enough, to Bernie Sanders' campaign. They worked there for free in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, they had 3 or 4 of them
no
working in
kidding.
New Hampshire. Some other states where they had primaries after New Hampshire that cycle. And he was fined $25,000. His campaign was fined $25,000 for a violation of law. You know what really kind of got me outraged by that is there's a provision in the FEC statutes that say if someone pays over a certain dollar limit, I'm going to try to remember, I might not remember exactly, I think it's over $20,000, then it's considered to be a felony. So serious that it's a
really?
felony and should be referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office. So I figured, well, Bernie, you made another mistake. You agreed you'd pay more than a $20,000 fine. So I referred it to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Concord, and I also sent it to the Public Integrity Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. And of course, they did nothing about it
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we don't live any longer in a country that is entirely one of laws, but a country of personalities. So when we see a Hunter Biden not being
Right.
prosecuted, and we see the extent to which they're going after Donald Trump
Right.
for minor concerns, we realize we're living in a country that is no longer meeting our aspiration to be a country of laws and not of people and identity when it comes to criminal liability.
What do you think we have to do to change that? How do you change something like that? Become,
There's only one thing that can be done.
huh?
The voters have to change it.
Yeah.
Certainly we have to get the message out, but they have to pay attention. Think about we're in Nashua here, and think about what the voters. I think it's of Ward 5. Is that where Representative Stacey Lawton?
4, I think.
Yeah, 4. It's the Elm Street area, the Tree Streets, and in that area there. Here's a man who had been convicted of a felony before he was elected the first time. He had to resign the first time because he hadn't completed his felony sentence, and that's a requirement under law before you can run as a state representative. He had a complaint against him for stalking a woman.
Right.
He calls himself a woman, but I guess he still has interest in women. He's obviously an individual that is unfit to be a state representative, and yet the voters of Ward 4 voted for him. Or the voters of Ward 4 have another representative that they just voted for, who essentially didn't leave his basement for 3 years, haven't left his basement for 3 years. It's Representative David Cody. He was elected last term, never ever showed up in Concord, never showed up. And just said, well, I'm too afraid, because of COVID, to come.
He used to show up when I was there.
Well, he was when I was on Judiciary, my second term, he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee. As a matter of fact, we were able to get one of my joys, one of the best things that happened to me that year was at one point when he was running the committee, I realized he was in a minority. There was no Republicans. So we took a vote and ousted him as chair for
really?
the remaining part of the meeting. And we ended up, just to have fun and to point out the absurdity of some legislation, we took a vote to bring forward a bill we had, a euthanasia bill, and they'd called it the Death with Dignity bill, so we officially changed its name to Let's Off Grandma bill. And so, you have to have some fun when you're in the minority.
Yeah.
But at any rate, here's a representative who hasn't come to Concord, is not going to go to Concord, and they're voting for him.
Yeah.
In the end, I can't remember who said it. Maybe you remember. People. There's a famous remark that someone said, "You get the government that you deserve."
Yeah, that's true.
And so for people to settle back and to say those damn politicians and why aren't they better? Why don't they represent us better? People have to pay attention. You can't just vote tribally.
Right.
No more can you be out in maybe one of the rural districts in New Hampshire and say, I'm a Republican forever, I don't care, I'm not going to look at who it is, I'm just, if they have an R after the name, I'm going to vote. So too the voters in Nashua or Manchester to a lesser degree. There are Republican elected officials there, but they shouldn't be saying, I'm going to vote tribally. I'm going to just vote if you have a D after your name. Because if you do, you start getting people who can't show up, like Stacey Lawton, on Organization Day this week because he's in jail. And for stalking someone, violating a protective order. And will probably, it's a very serious thing. I mean, think of the horror of this young woman who is has now a state representative who is stalking her, saying that she's his wife, and it's up to the voters. People sometimes have difficulty understanding reality, and they have difficulty with mental health issues. And our reaction is to be kind to people like that. But our reaction shouldn't be electing them to the New Hampshire legislature.
Definitely.
And we ought to be cognizant that some people are entirely unfit.
Well, more education for the people, or some way of...
That's part of it. I mean, how many representatives, how many people are out there generally who are like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she was first elected? She's actually been there for a little while. As a U.S. Congress member, was asked to name the the three branches of government,
Right.
and she said the House, the Senate, and the President. And that's just showing someone who isn't educated.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's part of it. Part of it is just to understand that, as we were talking before, voting is real important. It's just not important for us to know our vote is not being stolen, but it's also important for us to just take it seriously. Who are we voting for? Is this person, not just part of our tribe, part of the
Right.
blue team
Right.
and the red team, whatever, but someone who's a serious individual and careful when making decisions in their own life, and therefore making decisions when they're representing us.
And we ought to make sure our children are getting that early on,
Yeah.
but a little bit more civic education.
I think so. I mean, it certainly is as much importance in that as it is in what Democrats seem to be so concentrated on, which is making sure that they're around, transvestite and cross-dressing men so that they're tolerant of those people. Well, that's probably not a bad thing. We don't want to be mean to people, but they really have to know what the three branches of government are. and they have to understand what is to be expected of elected representatives.
What their duties are,
Yeah.
and how it's run,
Yeah.
because maybe they'll be future representatives.
Well,
So,
you hope so. You
Yeah.
hope so. I mean, in the New Hampshire experience, there's a lot of people get elected all the time. So you hope so. So, it was really kind of a good cycle, though. I really enjoyed it. They asked me afterwards, and if I'd come back and do it again. And I said, no, I bet you there's somebody else. would
they
love
didn't ask
to do
you to
this.
move to Wisconsin or something like that to help them out there?
No, no. Yeah, and we're even on election day, we're able to assist in making sure that people were able to vote. For example, in Derry, as it turned out that things were really busy, and for some reason, a lot of people came near the end of the day. We started getting calls from the volunteer lawyers we had there saying there's huge lines, there's lines of cars to get in the parking lot. There's only, I think they said, only about 45 minutes left before the polling location closes. And so we were on the phone with the Attorney General, the Secretary of State's office, very responsive to us. He said, we got to do something, keep it open. I said, why don't we do this? Why don't you put cruisers behind the lines of cars coming in, and everyone who's in front of that cruiser is in line, because there's something in Hampshire statute saying if you're in line
Yeah, right.
and you can't get into where the polling station that you voted, they'll keep it open. I said, why don't we do that? And it turned out, I think I have the right number, that they identified 7 lines of cars coming from various roads. So they had 7 cruisers out there behind the lines of cars. So
okay.
people were able to vote, and so you feel kind of good about stuff like that. You're solving some problems, and doing what people, I think, expect those who are involved in public affairs to do, which is to make their lives easier, to make the democracy work better.
Well, I'm happy I'm in New Hampshire. I'm pleased with everything the way it was run. I actually volunteered myself this time as a ballot, and had fun because the machine broke down.
It happens. It happens.
Yeah.
One of the things we were able to do as a party this time, and we discovered, when I was doing my initial preparation, I talked to the party chair, Steve Stepanek, is we found out, no one had apparently paid attention to it for a while, that there was a position called, which you referenced, I think you're referencing, called Inspector of Elections. And each party gets to appoint at least 2 inspectors of the election for each polling location, more for larger locations. I think the largest in terms of any one polling station might be Londonderry, because it has the whole town. And I think you can point up to 13 or 14 there. And these people are actually elected officials. Democrats can appoint 2, we can appoint 2. And just the presence there, doing, handing out ballots, answering questions, verifying the count of unused ballots coming in, verifying the count at the end of the evening of used ballots and unused going out, just that sort of integrity, I think adds a lot of confidence to the election and requires people to be fairly careful, because you have Democrats and Republicans. We appointed, I think, just shy of 600 of those statewide. And then you can also have, as I'm sure your listeners or your viewers know, partisan observers at elections. And Democrats do, we do. And we appointed over 700 of those separately to be at the polling places and to watch what was going on. And we didn't come up with many problems at all.
Good.
It was good. There's some kind of silly stuff. During the primary we had, what was the name of it? I can't remember. There's something, Cornish Flats. There's a place called Cornish Flats. And Cornish Flats had a polling place. And somebody called us there. We had attorneys doing rounds, went there and said, the Democrats have 30 feet of signs and there's no one attending the signs. And so we called up, and the Secretary of State said, no, that's wrong. It shouldn't be. Called up Democrats and said, you can't do that. And so they put some little old lady out there in a lawn chair in front of the 30 feet. And so we were able to get that. And I understood something about that I hadn't in the past. You probably came across this. What it is an exception to no electioneering at a polling place. And the exception is a First Amendment. You have a right to a speech. But it has to be your speech. You have to be holding on to the sign.
That's right.
So it's your speech.
Oh, yeah.
So,
we got called on that. We're coming to an end, though, of our time.
Yeah, well, it was a lot of fun.
You're running out. We'll have to bring you back for another edition.
Sure, I'd be glad to.
And then you can talk about other things that happened that are interesting.
As the time goes on, I have more and more war stories, Carl. Eventually, that's all you and I'll have.
You're very interesting, too. Thank you. You're a very good audience for our audience.
Yeah, well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I do appreciate it.
Well, thank you again.
You keep these going here, all right?
Yeah, we'll keep it going. Let the people know what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Very valuable resource you have here.
Thank you.
Thank you.